So I, I don't know how many people are on right now, but I'll just start talking. Hello, everybody. I'm Judith Kaufman, Sullivan County Democratic Chair, and I'll be explaining our debate format this evening and also functioning as your timekeeper. I want to start our webinar by thanking our extremely impressive and esteemed gubernatorial primary candidates for agreeing to participate in the Sullivan County debate forum. In addition, I want to thank everybody in the audience for taking time to attend our webinar event. If for some reason we don't have enough, if after all the questions are answered, you still have a burning issue that you would like to be, or a question that you would like answered by one of the campaigns, both candidates will be giving the address for their websites and contact information, so you could send your question to them. Right now, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Steve Taylor is a lifelong Sullivan County resident. He has been involved in many community and state level activities, including 31 years as Plainfield's moderator and 25 years as New Hampshire's Commissioner of Agriculture. He and his 3 sons operate a working farm in Plainfield. In an effort to get everybody on the same page this evening, I want to explain tonight's debate format. We're starting with opening statements from both candidates for a maximum of 4 minutes each. Our moderator will ask candidates a total of 6 pre-selected questions. Each candidate will answer each question. They will have a maximum time of 3 minutes to each to answer. Next, the moderator will ask the candidates 5 pre-selected audience questions. Each candidate will answer each question. They will have a maximum time of 3 minutes each to answer. Next, the moderator will ask the candidates, oh, I'm sorry, I already talked about the pre-selected. At any time during the Q&A period, if a candidate mentions the other candidate's name, the moderator will give the other candidate 30 seconds to respond. Finally, both candidates will give their closing statements for a maximum of 5 minutes. Since Andru is starting with his opening statement, Dan will start with his closing statement. The questions will also be alternated between the two. Now, I hope everybody enjoys the debate. I hope it's informative and interesting for you. Now let's start by hearing the candidates' opening remarks.
First.
Andru is first.
Okay, thank you everyone. I hope tonight we talk about 3 things: reducing property taxes, improving schools, and no pipelines. We're in the midst of a COVID, economic, climate change, racial injustice crisis. Now is the time for bold ideas and courageous leadership. As most of you know, I was the Claremont school funding lawyer. I led a team of volunteer lawyers who exposed just how unfair our school funding system is and how the quality of a child's education often depends on where she lives. But we did more than just expose the problem. We convinced the Supreme Court to recognize a constitutional right to a state-funded public education. That was a bold idea. But for lack of courageous leadership, we've never fully realized the promise of Claremont. That is why I'm running for governor. When I first went to Claremont, it was a little like going home for me. I grew up in a mill town where the mill failed. My dad was a mechanic and a maintenance man and a union shop steward. My mom was a homemaker. I'm the only one in my family to go to college. I went on scholarship. I paid for law school by working as a carpenter. I understand the difference that educational opportunities have made in my life, and that is why I will never take the pledge. The pledge is a promise to fail. It chains us to the past. In fact, we've released our own pledge. which is to reduce the property tax for the majority of New Hampshire citizens. It's not divisive to say we have policy differences. You need to make a choice come September 8th, and this is one point on which we are very different. I won't take the pledge. The other point on which we're very different is on climate change. I oppose the fracked gas Granite Bridge pipeline scheduled for the southeastern part of the state. I think it's a $400 million step in the wrong direction. Look, Amy and I are grandparents. Our younger grandson is 9 weeks old. I have yet to hold him. And I confess that I see climate and environment through the eyes of a grandfather. That's why I think the time for half measures is over. There's no excuse for just one more pipeline. That's why I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club. You know, but we need to do more than stopping the bad things. We need to move New Hampshire forward with a regional Green New Deal, with making New Hampshire state government carbon neutral by 2030. Look, we need to stop Chris Sununu, and I've shown that I'm capable of leading the executive council in doing that. We stopped Gordon MacDonald, a hard-right, anti-choice Supreme Court nominee. We've stopped 3 different climate change deniers. It's time that we make a change. I humbly ask for your support. Go to VolinskyNH.com to join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. And next, Dan Phelps.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you, Steve, and thank you both for all that you do, and Steve, for your lifelong service to the public and to the state of New Hampshire. And public service takes many different forms. Folks on the Zoom call provide a public service. Your activism, your engagement in the Sullivan County Democratic Party is critical to winning this fall. And I can tell you, as Majority Leader of the State Senate, the singular obstacle to meaningful and inclusive progress for all our families, all our communities, and the state of New Hampshire is Chris Sununu. And with your help, we are going to beat Chris Sununu on November 3rd. We're going to do that. We have got to do that. I have a distinctly different perspective and background than the current governor. My dad wasn't governor. My brother wasn't a U.S. senator, and I was never gifted a ski resort. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years, the same furniture factory doing roughly the same job, day in and day out, in an un-air-conditioned furniture factory for 45 years. Fortunately, still worker organized. My mom, she worked part-time jobs, including the night shift while raising 4 kids. The gifts they gave me were the values of hard work, honesty and integrity, and looking out for working people and working families. Those are the values I've tried to live my entire life. Right out of law school, not joining a job as a corporate attorney, joining New Hampshire Legal Assistance as a legal aid attorney, fighting for low-income families all across New Hampshire for about a decade, fighting for seniors, fighting for survivors of domestic and sexual violence, fighting for housing rights, fighting against Wall Street banks for closing on folks all around New Hampshire during and after the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, helping people get back up on their feet during that time, doing my best to give people opportunity. Did that for about a decade. Saw what is going on at the State House, where it seems like the system's rigged for those at the top and corporate special interests. And so often the laws written behind closed doors with corporate special interests in mind, not ordinary people, not low to middle income families. That's why I ran for the state Senate against the Democratic establishment. That's why I've served for 3 terms and as majority leader each and every time and each and every day, lifting up the voices of ordinary people. That's what I will do as governor. If I have the honor and privilege of serving as your next governor of the state of New Hampshire, each and every day I walk in the corner office, I'll look out for ordinary people. And we have got to. Chris Sununu's vetoes show it. His vetoes recently on paid family and medical leave insurance, calling it, not once, not twice, but 3 different times, a vacation. Well, this fall, we're going to give Chris Sununu a permanent vacation. Working together, we're going to do that. And I look forward to talking with you about all the ways we're going to do that, as I've been flagged for my time, but you can visit our website at danfeltusnh.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And now Steve Taylor, our moderator, is going to start with the first group of 6 questions.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to alternate the order here. First, for the first question, I'll ask Councilor Volinsky to speak first, and then Senator Feltus to follow. The first question is, what management strategies will you employ in the corner office that will make you stand out from any previous New Hampshire governor, Democrat or Republican?
Well, thank you, Steve. So let's first start with the structure of state government. Lots of people talk about the governor in New Hampshire being a weak governor. I don't think that's the case. I think the governor has to be more collaborative than governors in other places. And I think it's the job of the governor to be the collaborator in chief, to bring parties together from both sides of the aisle around difficult issues. And I think you do that by focusing on the facts and becoming deeply steeped in the issues before you. So one of the facts is New Hampshire has a broken revenue system. We rely more on property taxes than any other state in the union. The property tax is a broad-based tax. You pay it if you own a home directly, you pay it as a renter indirectly. It'll be my goal as governor to focus us on creating a fair tax system that can pay for the services in which we should invest. And that's the second change. Too many governors have thought of every governmental expenditure as a cost to be minimized. And in some instances, a governmental expenditure is an investment, and you nurture your investments. So when I think of investments, I think of the education system, I think of roads and bridges, I think of mental health, I think higher ed, and I think physical health. I think access to healthcare is a basic human right, and I would work hard to make that a reality for citizens all across our state. That's how I'd approach the job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And now Dan.
Thank you, Judith. To me, it's about results and reform. Working in the state Senate for 3 terms, we delivered results. I was a lead Democratic negotiator on Medicaid expansion, reauthorization, securing the health care for 50,000 granite staters. We got that done, not once, but twice. And we need to make it permanent in the next upcoming biennium. Just recently, I led the way on prescription drug affordability, including capping out-of-pocket insulin costs and importing safe, low-cost drugs from Canada. We got that through. On clean water, on so many other initiatives, we have led the way in a bipartisan way. And in fact, I talk a lot about all the vetoes, but the fact is Chris Sununu signed over 100 of my bills too. We've gotten a lot of bipartisan progress. The impediment to bipartisan progress is Chris Sununu. Of the 65 bills he vetoed, 48 of them had bipartisan support. So look, that's the singular obstacle to meaningful and inclusive change. And on reform, this campaign, I'm deeply troubled by the effects of corporate special interests. We need to end the effects of Citizens United in New Hampshire, which is why I'm honored to be endorsed by Citizens United in this race. We need to ban no-bid contracts. We need to get corporate money out of our politics. We need a reform that works for ordinary people. And it's not just Washington, D.C., it's Concord. And Chris Sununu is the enabler of that system.
Very good. Okay, let's move on to question number 2. As we have seen with the COVID-19 crisis, maintaining good public health requires more than ensuring adequacy of and access to medical care system. It requires attention to a myriad number of matters, including the economy, housing, and food supplies. As you look at New Hampshire's response to COVID-19, how would you revamp our public health system to meet a potential second wave of COVID-19 or future pandemics? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Steve. Well, first and foremost, we got to move forward on addressing the nursing home crisis. We have amongst the worst in the nation nursing home crisis in New Hampshire under Chris Sununu, who took no steps to deal with it for a month and a half. And the first thing he did is go out to a no-bid contract to a corporate campaign donor on testing, which was clearly insufficient, didn't mitigate or control the problem. Over 300 of our nursing home residents have been lost to COVID-19. And so we passed legislation to shore up the nursing home situation. Chris Sununu, by the way, just vetoed it. That was testing PPE for nursing homes. We need to get a handle on PPE more generally. And we need to prepare, if there is a second wave, we need to prepare and stockpile. Chris Sununu has refused to join the Northeast Regional PPE Purchasing Partnership to leverage buying power and to get PPE for our businesses, our healthcare providers, and our residents. Third, we need to support small businesses, including providing free PPE for small businesses. Chris Sununu just vetoed that. Fourth, we need paid family and medical leave insurance, something I've led the way on. Chris Sununu just vetoed that again. And fifth, we need a plan for our schools. There is no quote unquote plan right now for school reopening. In fact, Walmart just instituted masks in Walmart. There are no requirement of masks in our schools for our school kids. It's a sad state of affairs when you're safer in Walmart than in New Hampshire schools. Chris Sununu did not plan for the fall. All people wanted was certainty this fall. All parents wanted, like myself and others, wanted certainty for this fall in teachers. And what Chris Sununu delivered was complete chaos. There needs to be a concrete plan to deal with our schools if we're going to move forward, including dealing with a second wave. We also need to make sure that we deal with healthcare access, including waiving cost sharing for COVID-19 testing and treatment, including out-of-network COVID-19 testing and treatment costs. That was legislation we just passed. And guess what? Chris Sununu vetoed it. So if you want to look at the roadmap of how you plan for a second wave and how you move forward and bring people together on a public health matter, look at what we just passed. In addition to that, Steve, we need a plan for the economic impacts of this. For example, we have legislation to protect homeowners from foreclosure from Wall Street banks who are now foreclosing on folks all around New Hampshire. The same situation, the same people falling through the cracks that I represented as a legal aid lawyer back at the Great Recession. Chris Sununu vetoed basic housing protections for homeowners facing foreclosure. We need a relief and a recovery effort, Steve, that looks out for ordinary people, not just those at the top, not just corporate campaign donors of Chris Sununu, not just people who have Chris Sununu's cell phone number. Everyday Granite Staters matter, and we need to look out for everybody if we're going to truly plan for and move forward together.
Counselor?
Thank you. So I think Sununu was too slow and incomplete in his initial response to COVID-19. We had a council meeting on March 11th at which I raised issues about closing schools, being careful with businesses. Sununu said he'd just been on the phone with Mike Pence and it was going to be no worse than a flu. That's why he had Frank Edelblut close the schools on Sunday afternoon, not to reopen on Monday. We had no notice. That's a problem. You asked about our public health capacity. Our public health service within HHS was diminished by Speaker Bill O'Brien. We need to invest in that infrastructure so that we don't have to go out to these no-bid insider sweetheart deal contracts, as Sununu has done, to hire contact tracers and then put them up in Steve Dupree's hotel ballroom because there was no planning in advance for the eventuality of the need to respond to this crisis. Friends and family are going for testing these days. It takes 7 days to get a response. We can't reopen safely and stay open through the fall if it takes 7 days to get a response. I asked at the last council meeting last Wednesday, who's in charge of the vaccine program when it's issued? The best statements about vaccine is that it'll take 2 administrations 30 days apart. Who's in charge? No one knew. I asked the governor and Lori Shibinette, the commissioner, to put together a plan to share with the council for our August meeting so that we're on top of this. This brings us to Frank Edelblut. It was me who pressed Edelblut to finally reveal that a DC consulting firm put together New Hampshire's school reopening plan. It's not a plan, it's a wish list. It provides no resources and no guidance for local communities. Here's what I do. Every child wears a mask. Parents drive or walk their kids to school as best they can, so we reduce density on the buses. We stagger attendance at schools, so reduce density in the classroom. We teach as much outside as possible and keep the windows open. One of the problems with the Sununu Edelblue DeVos plan is there's no money for air exchangers. There are engineering standards that should be met in our 50 and 60-year-old schoolrooms, and we don't know if it's safely met. We need to put some money aside for that. And then we need to be prepared to close again in mid to late October, because that's when cold and flu season starts, and you won't be able to tell whether it's a cold or flu or COVID-19, and you'll have to start closing the windows. So I would do all of that to safely reopen schools, but I'd plan to close after 6 weeks or so. The governor's failed miserably in rolling out unemployment benefits, particularly to self-employed people in the gig economy. We need to beef that up so that people understand the rules and we can implement those rules in a timely fashion. There's a radio show host who I go on with Tuesday mornings. He's still waiting for his unemployment check. Finally, I would build up the community health centers. That should be the backbone of our response to healthcare crises. I was on the board of the Manchester Community Health Center. It's a federally qualified health center. That could be the strong and secure backbone to respond to COVID-19 as we go further. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Next question is, what are 2 or 3 things you hope the current commission to study school finance will recommend based on their research? Council?
So do I have about a week for this?
Unfortunately, no.
You'll understand it's a topic on which I'm a bit passionate. So first, we have to understand that the way we fund schools based on local property taxes protects the status quo, keeps the wealthiest people in our state from contributing their fair share, and we need to fix that system. Whatever the methodology, and I won't take the pledge, I say all options need to be on the table. That should allow us to raise funds in a fair way. It's not that we really need to spend more broadly across the state. Overall spending is okay, but we need to raise it fairly and we need to spend it fairly. So I would hope that there'd be some recommendations as to get every community up to about the average expenditure, which is $16,000, in a way that doesn't put Claremont so far behind all the other communities in our state in terms of being competitive as far as property taxes. Doesn't hold back Newport or Berlin or Rochester. My friends John Tobin, Doug Hall, and I did 70 forums around the state, and we learned that there is a consensus to move forward and change the way we fund schools. So I would hope that this commission comes out with some concrete examples that honors and implements Claremont in a fair way across the state. You know, it still galls me that a guy like Mitt Romney, who has a $10 million estate on the lake in Wolfboro, pays $7 in property taxes. And in Claremont, it's $42. That's just not right. The wealthiest people in our state need to pay their fair share. So I hope they do that. Then I would look at the buildings in our state. We have 488 school buildings. Many are more than 50 years old. We can get a twofer out of this. We can upgrade the buildings by refurbishing or replacing. And at the same time, we can conserve energy and put solar panels on the roofs of every building possible to move New Hampshire forward to a more green future. Thank you.
Senator?
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, we have to protect the budget that we passed. The most progressive budget in state history. the biggest public education budget in state history, the biggest increase since then Governor Gene Shaheen, finally treating kindergartners the same as any other grade school, or something I ran on in 2014. We finally treat them the same. And we need to move forward finally with pre-K, which is part of what we crafted in the legislature on that school funding commission. We crafted this budget, Steve, by closing loopholes for big corporations. Corporations like Netflix, who prior to this budget paid nothing in corporate taxes to the state of New Hampshire. Despite having a tangible business relationship selling a product into the state of New Hampshire, they paid nothing. We closed that loophole. So Netflix and Amazon actually pay in our corporate tax bill, which is the biggest chunk of our state budget. And we sent that money to our communities, including Claremont getting a 32% increase in its budget. Is it enough? No. Does it deserve more? Absolutely. But that's the biggest increase in 20 years. So you can do this by closing loopholes for big corporations and those at the top. I reject the suggestion that it's either a broad-based income tax or nothing. We've demonstrated in this budget that that's in fact false. And so I get this, talking point about the so-called pledge, but you know what? Here's what we do. The pledge and the talking point about the pledge is not a plan. You talk about actually delivering results. That's what we did in the last legislature. Sununu vetoed it. He had to accept it in the end. We need to build off of that, including closing more of those loopholes for big corporations and those at the top at the expense of everyday granite staters. That's what's at stake in this race. Chris Sununu is pushing taxes for big corporations down while everyone else is taking it on the chin. That's a rigged system. We need to change that. We need to look out for ordinary people. That's where this budget head. We got to protect it and build off of it and use some of the recommendations from the School Funding Commission. We'll look at what they come up with. We have to move forward on pre-K. We have delivered results. We have to protect it and then build off of it. I'm honored in this race to be endorsed by the chair of the Senate Education Committee, the chair of the House Education Committee, and the chair of the School Funding Committee, because we deliver results, not just debate.
Steve, I think this is a worthy topic to go further on. And I kind of think it was called out a little bit. So this was a progressive budget. But before this budget, we were 50th in the nation in state support for education. We remain 50th in the nation in state support for public education. We've had some good governors, Maggie Hassan, John Lynch, Jeannie Shaheen. They all tried to close the school funding gap with the existing infrastructure, and they all failed. There's no reason to believe that now, all of a sudden, we're going to find new loopholes that we can close. We should close the loopholes. I agree with that. But to think that'll make the significant difference to improve the quality of education and taxes, it won't do it.
Very good. I should grant Senator Feltus a
Of
word.
course, of course.
I'll come back on that.
Well, look, the proof is in the pudding. We demonstrated democratic control of the Senate and the House, and I'm not going to criticize the work of the legislature. People worked hard on that budget, delivering the biggest public school education funding in state history, disparity aid, full day K, stabilization. Claremont got a $4.3 million increase in FY 2021 and beyond. What Chris Sununu did, look, here's what Chris Sununu did. After he accepted the budget, after he vetoed it, he went around with these overblown checks trying to take credit for it. And then he wrote a letter to superintendents of schools saying, consider it one time. Folks, if we don't win this race, you know where Chris Sununu is going to go with his rare third term as governor. He's going backwards on ed funding. This race is about winning.
Okay, very good. Next question, Senator, you'll start off on it. According to a recent survey, New Hampshire ranks 21st highest in the study of small businesses affected by the coronavirus. The state earned a total score of 51%. About 87% of New Hampshire small business owners report that their business has been hurt by the COVID-19 outbreak. and 35% say that their companies may not survive another 3 years. What programs, policies, and actions would you support to mitigate the stress of the COVID virus on our small business sector?
Thank you very much, Steve. We have been outspoken on the need to use CARES Act money to really truly support our small business community, including moving that money through the Business Finance Authority to be deployed in a meaningful way to small businesses. Here's what Chris Sununu did with $400 million of CARES Act money. He defined a small business as $20 million a year in revenue, even though the Business Finance Authority defines it as $5 million for their capital investment program. So quadruple already. And on top of that, he didn't put in place any safeguards to prohibit the application of those funds through multiple legal entities. And what we've seen recently is small businesses, based on clerical errors, have been disqualified from it. And we know that Chris Sununu said, if you're a big corporation, you get $350,000 out of this fund. If you're a small business, most anecdotally, and most what we've seen from the spreadsheet, just getting a few thousand. That's not Main Street relief. That's what he called it. That was propaganda. We need to look out for people on Main Street, small businesses. That's what this is all about, looking out for those who need it most, Steve. That's what this campaign's all about. How do we get out of this mess in a way that works for ordinary people in small businesses? Or is it going to be more of the same from Sununu, looking out for corporate special interests, big corporations, those at the top, and as corporate donors? That's why reform is so important, including on no bid contracts, including on transparency. I'm the only candidate to release my tax returns in this race for governor. All of that's important. It's all part of this. So we need to designate and actually use the programs that work to lift up our business community, like the Business Finance Authority. We need to provide PPE for small businesses too. You may recall that Sununu started an online system where businesses could get PPE. And then he took it away from them and then put all the PPE at the liquor stores and said, you got to go over there and buy it at cost. I mean, give me a break. That's ridiculous. So we passed legislation saying small businesses get PPE. Look, they're fending for themselves right now. They're not being supported by Chris Sununu. Our small business community needs a champion in the corner office, not someone who's going to look out for big corporations and those at the top. And we need to get a grip on our healthcare costs. We have the highest healthcare costs in the nation, right here in New Hampshire, Steve. Highest premiums, highest copays, highest deductibles. And Chris Sununu has vetoed legislation after legislation to get a grip on those high healthcare costs, which crush working families and small businesses in particular. And another thing that crushes is the absence of paid family and medical leave insurance, which disproportionately affects small businesses and working families. Those are just some of the ways we need to support our small business community and our entrepreneurs at the local level.
Very good. Counselor?
Thank you, Steve. So I think supporting small businesses is a value that I was pursuing long before COVID-19, and thinking about the ways in which we can do that in New Hampshire. Because remember, Chris Sununu went on that tour. He was going to attract 100 businesses in 100 days to New Hampshire, the largest businesses in the country. Amazon was going to come to New Hampshire all of a sudden. That's not how you build New Hampshire's economy. New Hampshire's economy is built on small and medium-sized businesses. You attract those and you help them grow. So I've been thinking for quite some time before COVID, but more so now, what are the building blocks that businesses need in order to come here and to grow? So you start with an educated workforce. You invest in schools and community colleges and universities. You look at the cost structure for businesses in New Hampshire. We have some of the highest energy costs in New England and in America. Part of that is the artificial result of Sununu being the governor from Eversource. He's taken over $100,000 from Eversource and refused to allow net metering solar energy to develop in New Hampshire the way it should. New Hampshire has 1% solar, Vermont has 12% solar. The difference shows. After you talk about energy costs, you talk about tax structures. Everyone talks about loopholes in the business taxes. The truth is, Businesses in New Hampshire pay twice as much in property taxes as they pay in business taxes. It is truly a broad-based tax, and it kills business development in places like Sullivan County. We need to address that. The CARES Act money is going to be necessary to fill holes in local government and local school district budgets because property tax payments will be off. They come due whether you have income or not, but a lot of people aren't going to be able to pay them. And Chris Sununu has refused to allow any of the CARES Act relief money to be applied to shortfalls in local budgets. I would apply it there. He has done some things with broadband. We haven't done enough. Broadband needs to be treated as if it's a utility. And so if you're the company that has the service area, you need to service the people in that area and the businesses in that area. That's how you build a broad gig economy. We have beautiful places like Cornish and Plainfield, where if there's good coverage, people will live there and build their businesses there. And we should use more of the CARES Act money for that. I already mentioned in an earlier answer that we need to do better to support businesses, particularly self-employed, those working in the gig economy, on getting unemployment benefits in a real timely fashion. I would go back to that point and build that structure so that we can take federal money and disperse it appropriately to small businesses. That's how I'd approach this problem. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, Counselor, here's the next one. The only natural resource-based commercial activities in New Hampshire are forestry and agriculture. The economic potential of both is scarcely recognized in Concord, and strengthening them could expand employment, enhance our food system, and pay significant environmental benefits. What might you do as governor to lead a renaissance in these two vital areas of our state?
What a great question. I think the biggest travesty, no matter what you think of biomass as an energy source, the biggest travesty was Sununu withdrawing the supports without any plan for the hardworking people who work in the woods, who depended on those biomass plants to sell the pulpwood. That's been a huge problem. I'm worried that we're auctioning off skidders every day, and that business, that industry will be gone before another governor can take Sununu's place and help to revive some of it. He gave an insider benefit to Burgess Energy, owned by Kate Street Capital. That's a typical Sununu favoring an insider. I think we need to do more in that area. Maine still has some of its old plants functioning. They're doing things with wood products that can't be done in the Berlin area because those Berlin and Gorham and Colebrook, those plants have been dismantled. That's a problem. We've lost that capacity. We need to try and rebuild that capacity. On the southwestern part of the state where you are, there's opportunity for reviving the forestry industry. We need to take a close look at how we do that in terms of current use taxation. There are those who work in the industry who deserve that benefit, but there are a lot of really wealthy people that are using current use to avoid paying their fair share. And we need to have a close look at that as well. As far as agriculture is concerned, it would be great to have a commissioner of the Department of Agriculture that actually understood farming, that took us to a place where we could do more on-farm direct sale, that allowed us to open up farmers markets in a way that allowed home brewed beer, home distilled liquors to be sold there, that improved our slaughter capacity for those kinds of farms. Those are all things that I would hope to have, and I know I'm in the presence of the best agriculture commissioner we've ever had. So I'm saying this with humility, but we can do a lot better than Mr. Jasper.
Very good.
So
Senator?
I completely agree with that. And, you know, look, there's a few things that we need to do. We are losing family farms and small farms, hand over fist, from when Steve was there and now to when Jasper's there. I mean, we need to support our family farmers and our small farms, including the farm to table programs, and connect to our main streets, connect to our small business, our restaurant industry that's been particularly impacted by COVID-19. Form those connections, support, not just in times of drought, but support on a regular basis. We've taken some steps in the State House to do that, but there's a lot more to do. Some of the CARES Act has been allocated to farms. I happen to think more of it should have been by the governor, but you know, we can change that down the road. In terms of biomass, I've worked with Senator Jeb Bradley. He and I were the ones that testified together on the biomass legislation to make sure that we hold true to those 6 plants, make sure that because it's not just about the workers at the plants, it's about sustainable forest management. That's why the Forest Society and others supported those legislative efforts. It's about the people in the woods that are working hard. And one of the more disappointing days at the State House was seeing the loggers and the folks that work in the woods up in the gallery of the State House after we overrode the Governor Sununu's veto of supporting biomass, but then the House fell, I think it was 2 or 3 votes short, and seeing those people leaving the gallery with their head down, knowing they're losing their jobs, knowing that their family was directly and forever impacted. And so that's why this year I proposed legislation on job training to connect those folks with the jobs of tomorrow in clean energy, in broadband, in housing. Sununu and the Republicans opposed it. And what we need to do is make those connections and make sure that we lift their stories up. And like most Granite Staters, they're not particularly folks that want to ask for help. And so we need programs that reach out to folks. We need to fix a broken unemployment insurance system, which we have legislation to do just that, Steve, and Governor Sununu vetoed it. We need to make sure that we connect people with the resources to get them reemployed. And this is about fighting to include more people in our democracy and economy, not exclude them. Lift people up, not tear people down. In order to move New Hampshire forward, we can't afford to leave anyone behind. And so that's part of the vision of what we need to talk about: a statewide economic plan, a statewide healthcare plan that looks at all of the sectors and it truly appreciates the value of every sector. And that's what we'll do when we win this race.
Good, thank you. Okay, Senator, please tell us your position on the Granite Bridge fracked gas pipeline, and tell us, as governor, what measures you would take to make New Hampshire a leader in the battle against climate change. And will you reinstate the state incentives for solar and other renewables and increase the cap on net metering? You support offshore wind. There's a lot there.
So first and foremost, you know, the vast overwhelming majority of Granite Staters heat their home in the wintertime with natural gas or oil heat. That's just the practical reality. And so the Granite Bridge, a proposal that's at the Public Utilities Commission and is going to be decided by the Public Utilities Commission in all likelihood the next month, not the next governor, is a connection between 2 existing pipelines. I've said preliminarily, if in fact it's determined necessary to meet the home heating need, then it makes sense. Testimony at the PUC indicates that that's not the case. But for me, this is a particularly sensitive matter because as a legal aid lawyer, I represented low-income families, including during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, folks who had their natural gas heat cut off in the wintertime, including by the natural gas company, including by their landlord failing to pay the bill. And those families, I saw those families actually heating their home with their electric oven open. So to me, cutting people off of their heat in the wintertime is not an option. What we need is a comprehensive clean energy strategy to deal with thermal heating, deal on the electric side, and deal with transportation. Offshore wind, yes, I've led the way on that. Net metering, I've partnered with my Republican friends on 3 bipartisan net metering pieces of legislation, increasing the per project net metering cap from 1 megawatt to 5. Those were my bills that I worked on. Chris Sununu vetoed all 3. Solar, he vetoed my bill to ramp up new solar in the state by 7 times. And when he did, in his veto statement, Chris Sununu actually said, this amounts to, and I'm paraphrasing, crony capitalism for the solar industry. Setting aside the fact that Chris Sununu's brother is a lobbyist for the fossil fuel industry, and his associated consulting firm, friend, is the head of an Orwellian named group called New England Ratepayers Association that's fueled with fossil fuel money. So if anything, and I said this on the Senate floor, I respectfully disagree with using that kind of language in a veto statement, but let's be straight. If anything fits crony capitalism, Sununu's veto of solar fits crony capitalism, my bill. We have made some progress though, Steve, on community power, on community solar, bills that I've sponsored. We have so much work to do on this. And it's not just about combating the climate crisis. New Hampshire is the only state in New England that lost solar jobs last year, the only state. Direct consequence of Chris Sununu's vetoes. We have electric bills going up as a direct consequence of Chris Sununu's vetoes. The biggest share of our electric rates is regional transmission costs allocated to the state of New Hampshire. And when we don't shave our peak demand, like other states are doing, by doing energy efficiency, doing solar, doing distributed generation, our rates go up. So let's be clear, Chris Sununu's vetoes led to increased rates. So I've led the way on all the clean energy stuff. I've been the climate champion in the state Senate as vice chair of the Senate Energy Committee. I will continue to do that. We've delivered results, and that's what this is about, results. And we need real results to advance clean energy, reducing rates, advancing clean energy jobs, and combating the climate crisis.
Very good. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, we're going to move now to questions that have been submitted by, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Andrew.
Excuse me,
you need
Counselor.
to
I'm
answer
sorry.
that question.
I apologize.
It's okay, Steve.
Okay,
It's hard to keep track of all this. So look, my values have been clear from the start. My commitment to the environment and to combating climate change have been clear from the start. I've paid attention to the scientists who say we have 8 to 10 years to bend the curve on carbon. I got the same Granite Bridge briefing as all of the senators received in 2017. I came away from that briefing saying, fracked gas? Why in the world would I support fracking for New Hampshire's benefit? Whether it's here or in a neighboring state, fracking is dangerous to the environment and hurts us on climate change. I think it was close to 20 senators who came away from that briefing, Dan included, and signed up to support Granite Bridge. They're all listed on the Granite Bridge website, and all of them received campaign donations at the time. I've never taken fossil fuel money, and I won't, because I think we need to move New Hampshire forward. I've heard the arguments about capacity issues. Well, the PUC studied whether we have enough natural gas in New Hampshire and concluded that we have sufficient capacity. That is not a justification to build this pipeline, and I would oppose it, just as I opposed the Northern Pass project. I was vocal, I was out front, and I was moved forward by my values. How would I deal with climate change in New Hampshire and the environment? I would get us involved in a regional Green New Deal. We get our electricity from a power grid that covers most of New England. I would join in particular with Northern New England, Maine, and Vermont to build the kind of industry that would support clean power for our state and for Northern New England, one of my first tasks as governor would be to create an agency I call ACE, the Agency for Climate, Energy, and the Environment. And its job would be to create a citizen-informed plan to make New Hampshire state government carbon neutral by 2030. That's more than the obvious places like the Environmental Services Division. That would include schools. As I mentioned, a lot of our schools are dated and need to be refurbished. We need to do that with energy conservation and solar where it's available in mind. We need to reinstate and expand incentives. New Hampshire has 1% solar power. Vermont has 12%. I've worked hard to support community solar power. The legislature passed a good bill to start on that with respect to mobile home parks. Sununu tried to avoid signing the contract. Chris Pappas and I held his feet to the fire and forced it to go forward. I've worked actually in the solar area. Some partners and I tried to build utility scale solar on a landfill, and we ran right into that net metering cap. It prevents the development of solar in our state, and we need to move forward with a higher 5 megawatt net metering cap. Offshore wind, you mentioned. I'm 100% in support of it. We need to advance it in the Gulf of Maine with our neighbors in Maine and our neighbors to the south from Massachusetts. I agree that the Sununu family is the most cynical when it comes to clean energy. They created this fraudulent group called New England Ratepayers Association, and here's what they tried to do. They tried to pass regulations in DC that would put the federal government in charge of regulating net metering. And what their plan was to reduce the repayment when your solar produced extra energy and you fed it into the system. They wanted to reduce that to 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour. That would have decimated the industry across America. That's the Sununu family. That's what we need to fight against in New Hampshire.
Okay, very good. All right, now I think we're ready for audience questions that have been sent in advance. Begin with Councilor on this one, and it comes from Representative John Cloutier of Claremont. And he says, I believe as Public Works and Highways Committee Chair in the New Hampshire House, that New Hampshire's highway and turnpike funds need more revenue to fix our crumbling roads and bridges. Sununu has basically pledged to veto a gas tax or toll increase to help raise added revenue for both funds. I'd like to learn your views on this issue and see if you agree with Sununu or differ with him.
Well, it's pretty easy to say I differ with Chris Sununu on almost anything. And this is part of that difference that I make with him. Look, the Executive Council actually starts the 10-year transportation planning process every other year. This past year, I chaired that committee for the Executive Council. We held, I think it was 22 public hearings around the state to take public input. We found, as we did in my first term on the council, that there's support for commuter rail through the Nashua-Manchester corridor, that there's support for adding more funds to our crumbling roads and bridges infrastructure. The 10-year plan under a constrained budget, which means not spending more money than you think you'll have, which means you limit yourself almost completely to federal money. The 10-year plan means we're going to have more red listed bridges at the end of 10 years than we currently have. For a state that depends on hospitality and tourism, you mentioned the forestry industry, having broken roads and bridges is a problem. You asked a question earlier about the economy. The best way to get the economy cranking is to invest in infrastructure. It's almost clearly a 3 or 4 to 1 return on your investment. So we need to do that. Sununu would like to cut revenues and force communities to invest more. There's a map at the Municipal Association that they call the measles map. It's a map of New Hampshire with a series of red dots all across the state, one for each red listed bridge in the state. Those aren't even in the state plan. Those are municipal responsibilities. We pay for those red listed bridges or the repair of them based on local property taxes. Some communities can keep up, most cannot. This is a place to spend CARES Act relief money because it returns so much to the economy and gives us an opportunity to take care of our local communities. So I would do that. There's also talk, I think it was in the House, about increasing registration fees on high mileage cars and hybrid cars. That's the exact wrong direction to go. I know Peter Somcich has some legislation that's under consideration based on the weight of vehicles and doing registration that way. But penalizing people who get high mileage cars or who use hybrids makes no sense. That's not the way to get to combat climate change. That takes us backwards. I knew you were going to do that, Judith.
Senator?
Thank you. To John, thank you for your service. Folks at the State House do so much work, all for $100 a year. And John has done incredible work on infrastructure and transportation projects and that committee in general. So there's a lot of work to do. CARES Act money, toll credits, leveraging federal funds needs to happen. On commuter rail in and of itself, the toll credits that we've accumulated are far in surpass of what we even plan to use. They're just sitting there, including we proposed using toll credits for commuter rail. Our Republican friends opposed it, but we did get into the budget using toll credits to fund the engineering study, which is the next phase of commuter rail. So we did get that process into the budget, and that stayed in the budget despite the veto of Chris Sununu during the budget process. So you got to maximize what you already have. Like I said, use that CARES money. Transportation is vital. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. And if we're going to get out of this mess in a way that looks out for ordinary people, we got to invest in broadband, in workforce, affordable housing, in transportation infrastructure, our healthcare delivery system in a statewide basis, and we got to invest in the jobs of tomorrow in clean energy. All of that means good middle-class jobs. It means looking out for ordinary people. And by the way, it reduces costs for everybody, whether it's good roads, safe bridges, those are reducing costs on everybody. Clean energy reduces your electric bills. Healthcare infrastructure reduces healthcare costs. When you have access across the continuum of care and behavioral health, when we have the second worst opioid epidemic in the country and the second worst treatment capacity to deal with it, that's the kind of infrastructure we need to invest in as well. All of these things reduce costs in the long run and are cost beneficial to ordinary folks in particular. So if you want to be forward thinking on transportation, you're not going to vote for Chris Sununu. He even said, I'm going to refuse to even consider talking with governors on the Transportation Climate Initiative. That's not an approach that you should take. Refusing to even talk to people. I mean, he's refused to even talk to regional governors on the Northeast Regional PPE Purchasing Partnership. He refuses to talk to the Executive Council and collaborate. He refuses to talk with the legislature and collaborate. I wonder why he racked up 4 times the record in number of vetoes, because he doesn't work with people. And part of the job of governor is working with people. And that's what I've done in the legislature. That's what we've done in advancing all of these key issues that we're have the pleasure of talking about tonight, and that we need to build off of. The singular obstacle to meaningful and inclusive progress on transportation policy, just like every other policy, is Chris Sununu. And we need to win this race in order to move New Hampshire forward on transportation policy and look out for good middle-class jobs right here in the Granite State.
Very good. Okay, this question is submitted by Judith Kaufman. Since New Hampshire has such a large aging population and many young people are leaving our state, what strategies or policies do you support to help stop the outmigration of our young and educated people?
Who's that?
Senator. Senator's turn. Go ahead.
Well, this may be a flip answer, but you can start by electing a young progressive governor. That could help. But a more expansive answer is we need to invest in the kinds of things that keep young working families here. Iris and Josie are two amazing young daughters. We struggled through COVID-19 just like every other family that needs daycare when daycares were shut down. We need affordable daycare, childcare in the state. We need to provide the incentives to do that. We need paid family and medical leave insurance, something I've led the way on. And when Chris Sununu vetoed it last year, he actually auctioned off a copy of his veto at a partisan political fundraiser on the 4th of July to the highest bidder. And not only that, auctioned off the New Hampshire flag and the US flag flown over the State House the day he vetoed paid family leave. What kind of message does that send to veterans? And what kind of message does it send to working families who are thinking about moving to New Hampshire? We need to move forward on clean energy. Those are new good jobs that young people want to participate in the clean energy economy with. And it's a value system that attracts and retains young people. And we need to move forward on workforce and affordable housing. New Hampshire's vacancy rate in rental housing is less than 1%. Nationwide, it's about 5%. That means you can't find a place to live. And if you do, the prices, no pun intended, are through the roof. When you're looking at rental costs in the southern tier that are equate to the rental costs in the collar of Boston, and you just graduated BC, what are you going to do? I mean, this is a basic cost comparison. So we got to get a grip on workforce affordable housing. We've taken steps in the most recent budget to capitalize the Workforce Affordable Housing Fund for the first time in New Hampshire history on an ongoing and continuous basis. We need to build off of that to send a signal that New Hampshire is open for business on refabbing and remodding houses and apartment buildings and engaging in and constructing workforce and affordable housing. And New Hampshire has the highest debt load in the nation. So we need to continue the effort that we had in the last budget of freezing in-state tuition, but we need to build off of that and reduce in-state tuition in the next budget. And by the way, Democrats in the legislature did that, not Chris Sununu, despite what you hear. We put that in the budget, and we got that tuition freeze. On top of that, Steve, I think that we need student debt forgiveness for students that graduate a New Hampshire-based college or university that stay in New Hampshire in one of the high-need occupations that we need. For example, in healthcare. We need healthcare workers. And the so-called SLRP fund, the Student Loan Forgiveness Fund for healthcare workers at the state level, was just unilaterally cut by Chris Sununu, literally, out of the budget. When we need healthcare workers, including in behavioral health. So this is part of meeting our overall challenges of the state too, in healthcare, in energy, in broadband, and in housing. Those are the kinds of incentives that we need to put in place to make sure we attract and retain young working people, young working families, and move the state forward in a way that builds a bigger and better and brighter future for everybody.
Okay. Very good. Counselor?
Thank you, Steve. Many of you may know that Amy and I have 3 adult children, Josh, Molly, and Becca. They're pursuing careers in education, social work, and at a tech startup. They're happy, healthy, and they're all away. In some ways, that's good, but in some ways, they're emblematic of the problem. If you go away to college, you often don't come back. And that was the scenario with our three kids. It's particularly painful right now because Josh has a young family. We have a 9-week-old grandson. Actually, Amy and our daughter Molly just drove to Denver so she can hold the baby for the first time. I'm missing that trip. So I think a lot about this issue. I start with housing. Housing is unaffordable in many parts of our state. Part of that problem is the cost of property taxes. I just Saturday talked to someone who moved from a $500,000 house in Holderness to a $150,000 house in Keene, and her taxes went up by 20%. That makes no sense, and it's not sustainable. Young families also need childcare. I think we do more with the community college system to support people who want to go into early childhood education. It's one of the first areas where I would make community college free for someone who wants to pursue an associate's degree in early childhood education. People who work in that field are so grossly underpaid, $10 an hour often, and to do that with student debt makes no sense to me. And by the way, I would support a $15 minimum wage so that even those early childhood workers would get something approaching a livable wage that would attract younger people. I would invest in K-12 because young families want good schools for their children, and we do not have that uniformly across the state. If we improve our K-12 schools, it will better attract young people to our state and keep young people in our state. I already mentioned community college. We have a shortage of healthcare workers, licensed nursing assistants, RNs. We should be making their time at community college free to start with, to incentivize people to go into that field. Our goal should be to make community college free for everyone. It'll take us a while to get there, but we can start by incentivizing particular career paths. You know, community college in New Hampshire costs $7,600 a year in tuition. In Maine, it's $2,800, 1/3 as much. You want people to stop moving to Maine, to Portland, you need to reduce community college. The same is true with university tuition. We need to do more than simply freeze tuition. We need to bring it down. We need to deal with student debt. We are #1 in the nation in student debt. That is not something to be proud of. It's related to us to being 50th in the nation in K-12 state funding and university and college state funding. We need to do a lot better if we're going to keep and attract young people to our state. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, moving along. A question from Joanna Sharp of Cornish. She asked, what plans do you have to electrify our transportation? State vehicle fleets, will they become electric? How about electric buses or trains? New Hampshire is behind most states in regards to the number of electric vehicle charging stations. What can you do to improve this, Councilor?
So I mentioned earlier the ACE agency, the Agency for Climate, Energy, and the Environment, and building a plan that's citizen informed. I hope Ms. Sharp will be a contributor to the plan to get New Hampshire to carbon neutral by 2030. Using more electric vehicles makes a lot of sense, but we also need to think about the step beyond electric vehicles. I mentioned Peter Somsich, who's a state rep and a retired physicist. He tells me that there is great work being done with hydrogen powered vehicles, with fuel cells, that they're actually available in California, that the Port of Long Beach, California's second largest port, is already taking steps to encourage the use of electric and fuel cell powered vehicles. We need to be thinking 2 steps in advance. We do need to build out electric charging stations in the short term. They need to be available, but the practicality of electric vehicles, we have a electric plug-in hybrid that Amy's had for half a dozen years almost. It's been great. She gets hundreds of miles to the gallon because she never gets beyond the short radius of the electric charge, but that short radius is also a limiting factor. And so we need to do better in that regard across the state. So I would start with electric. I would start with building out solar powered electric charging stations. I would start with putting more solar panels on state property so that the state is generating its own power and feeding it into the system in a clean way, which also builds jobs parenthetically. But I would also be thinking about the next step as well.
Good. Thank you. Okay.
Each
Question. We'll start with Senator
Oh,
Felton.
wait a second.
Dan gets to answer that
Dan
one.
gets to
Wait,
answer
I
the
keep
question.
doing that. I'm sorry. Well, you know, advanced stage, you're a little absent-minded. Please forgive. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
you got it, Steve. Well, I mean, this is
Go
part.
ahead. Get it.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Transportation sector is part of a three-pronged strategy of combating the climate crisis right here in New Hampshire, which is an existential threat to all of us. I mean, they take responsibility at the local, state, and national level, and transportation is a key part of it. Right now, folks, Chris Sununu is sitting on the Volkswagen settlement money. The Volkswagen settlement money to be used for electric vehicle infrastructure. Literally sitting on it. He has not deployed it. And we need electric vehicle charging stations up and down our highways. And this is not just an issue about combating the climate crisis. It's an issue about tourism in our economy. If you own an electric vehicle and let's say you live in Massachusetts and you're determining where to go for vacation, Maine or New Hampshire, and Maine has charging stations up and down its highways and New Hampshire does not, where are you going to go? You're going to go to Maine. And we just lost out on tourism and economic prosperity as a result of that. So we need the electric vehicle charging stations. We need to move forward, in addition to that, with grid modification. There's a grid mod docket at the Public Utilities Commission that continues to do good work. But the electrification of our grid is critical to making sure that people have the ability to actually charge and move forward with electric vehicles. We do need to make sure our state fleet moves to clean energy. And that part of that is putting the infrastructure in and around our state fleet parking lots and doing solar on state roofs and ground mounted net metering throughout open spaces where applicable. That needs to happen. That needs to help with the charging. In addition to that, let's talk about school buses. That's a major opportunity and a cost-effective opportunity to explore to make sure that we charge up our school buses and make sure that those fleets transition to clean energy and to reduce emissions. And on top of that, loosening the restrictions for our school buildings with respect to not just energy efficiency, but for net metering and to engage in this kind of collaboration and to electrify our bus infrastructure in stock. That's really important. That's one of the higher emitters. And to move forward on that is a major opportunity for New Hampshire. Other states have done it. We have not. So transportation is a key component of an overarching plan. It's electric, it's transportation, it's thermal energy to make sure those people who heat their homes in the wintertime with natural gas and oil heat actually have a meaningful opportunity to transition off of natural gas and oil heat to clean energy, to heat pumps, to solar hot water heating. And every step of the way, by the way, not only is Sununu sitting on the Volkswagen money, he has vetoed clean energy legislation to transition us to a clean energy economy, resulting in your rates going up, jobs being lost, and us not fulfilling our responsibility here in New Hampshire to combat the climate crisis.
Okay, Senator, for this question, submitted by Claudia Estelle. Would you support undocumented immigrants without a social security number having a New Hampshire driver's license? And what effect do you think that would have on New Hampshire communities? How do you envision the relationship between ICE and state and local police? Should immigration status be a factor when someone has an interaction with the police? And what would you do to build a greater level of racial justice where everyone feels comfortable that their interactions with police will increase their safety?
Holy mackerel, there's a lot there. Well, it starts by speaking out against the Trump administration and their unconscionable approach to immigration and to people of color. And something Chris Sununu is fundamentally incapable of, something he calls himself, in his words, a Trump guy through and through, refused to speak out on children being put in cages, refuses to speak out against Trump's rhetoric targeting our Black and brown brothers and sisters. We need a governor that actually stands up for the right thing. And you know what? On this score, we all need to be more thoughtful of the words we use, how we engage in this discussion. It's not enough to be not racist. We all need to be actively anti-racist. And so many, each and every day, our Black brothers and sisters face words, actions, and policies that rob them of the American dream. What we need to do is listen and work with the grassroots. The best ideas come from the ground up, not the top down. Work with people I worked with as a legal aid lawyer, like Manchester NAACP, Willard Lett, the former president of Manchester NAACP. I worked with combating housing discrimination all around New Hampshire, and he has endorsed our campaign and our effort. Listen to folks. We had a Facebook Live conversation with Willard Lett, with Minister Ari Maredazan, and with the co-chair of Black Lives Matter, Manchester, Tyrell Whitted, talking about these key issues, how we move forward on racial justice. One of the things that we need to do, and one thing that I've proposed, is forming an office of racial equity within the governor's office immediately on day one. Similar to what Vermont has done, the director of the office would be a person of color. That office would be in charge of reaching out to communities of color to get their input on systemic practices within state government that has a disproportionate negative impact on communities of color. Actively involve everyone in decision-making in state government. And also look out for folks who would be qualified nominees to serve in state government that are people of color. That's critical. That office would have a statistician, which would be central to working on this kind of thing. Something similar to what I did when I was a legal aid lawyer, doing the statewide analysis of impediments to fair housing choice for New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, doing that and exposing a lot of the systemic issues that we have all around the state. So that's just one thing that we need to do. We need to move forward with things I've led on: criminal justice reform, including bail reform, protecting it and building off of it. The fact is that, you know, that was one of the bills, 100 bills plus, that I sponsored, that Chris Sununu signed, and ever since then he's been trying to weaken it. And we need to hang on to it. We need to recognize also that systemic racism exists everywhere. Chris Sununu recently said there's no systemic racism in New Hampshire. That's what he said. I mean, that is tone deaf. Those are the remarks of someone who was gifted a ski resort by his family and then ended up giving out a tax break to the ski resort. Look, let's get a grip on what's going on and let's listen to people on the ground. That's the only way we move forward, is if we listen to one another and lift each other up.
Okay. Counselor?
Thank you, Steve. I think you start responding to all of these issues by recognizing the problems that exist in today's society. New Hampshire has overt and systemic racism. Let's just say it. We have a relatively small minority population, but overt racism exists. The KKK held a rally in 1991 in Rochester. A young boy was almost lynched in Claremont in 2017. On Memorial Day, a Black man was stopped for having an out-of-date inspection sticker. The police wound up breaking in his window, tasing him, and pulling him out of the car by his hair. That's overt racism. But systemic racism also exists. We disproportionately arrest and punish Black and brown people. Black and brown people have disproportionately poor outcomes in the healthcare scenario, including in response to COVID-19. That's evidence of systemic racism. The lowest spending school district in our state is Manchester, where the student population is 43% diverse, more diverse than any other community in New Hampshire. There's more to be done than just adding more money to a school district budget, but it's a big start there. We need to have ethnically, culturally, and racially diverse curricula that is distributed throughout the state and taught in our schools. And you can't teach about systemic racism if everyone standing in front of the room is a white teacher. We need to recruit diversely to our teaching corps and our administrative corps. Look, racial justice is an important issue. About 3 weeks ago, the Black Lives Matters group issued a list of 7 demands. I saw those demands. I quickly, wholeheartedly endorsed them. And then I wrote a 6-page memo to the leadership of Black Lives Matters and told them they didn't go far enough. Here's how I would respond to systemic racism. I'd start with law enforcement. We're fortunate to have a single police academy where all the recruits go. I would start with implicit bias training there. I underwent implicit bias training myself in 2017. My staff at the governor's office, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, will undergo the same implicit bias training. Police officers should have more training in conflict de-escalation. They should have more practice informing or improving their mediation skills. And we need to demilitarize and diversify the police department. On healthcare, we need to have better outcomes. We need to build on the health center model. When it comes to income inequality, which again disproportionately affects Black and brown people, we need to institute a $15 minimum wage, and we need to adopt a prevailing wage. All of that needs to happen.
I'd like to intervene here because, to be fair to the Claudia Istil, the question was about immigration and specifically whether you would support undocumented immigrants without a social security number having a New Hampshire driver's license, which that law has been enacted in 13 other states.
Yes.
So if we could just get a quick 1-minute answer on that question to be respectful to the questioner, because it was an immigration question.
Okay, Senator, take it, and then we'll hear from Council.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think you need to work to build consensus on this. There was a bill on this that didn't make it through the process, and there was an idea of forming a commission to work together. If, in fact, you build consensus, get law enforcement on board, and there is a public safety argument, a clear one, then yes.
Okay, Andrew?
So I'm going to build that consensus because we need to pass a law that allows undocumented citizens to get their driver's license. There is a strong law enforcement. There is a strong social and racial justice argument to be made in favor of doing it. I'm for doing it. I'm not waiting for the consensus. I'm going to build that consensus.
Okay. Here's the final question submitted, and it's from Howard Dunn of Newport. He says, will you seek to rectify our dysfunctional economy by enacting an income tax to support, among other things, education? If so, what will be the rate and what will be the exemption amount? Counselor, you go first.
Thank you. So I've said from the outset that I will not take the pledge. That's based on my deep experience with Claremont. I don't personally think income tax is the best way to go. But for me, all options are on the table. We need to have the adult conversation that's not been had for far too long about how the over-reliance on the property tax, which is a broad-based tax that everyone pays, is killing us. It's forcing seniors out of their homes. It's stunting economic development. It makes it harder for young families and working families to buy homes and move into communities in most of the state. It really is setting us back. I think when we have this discussion, all the options need to be on the table, and we need to think outside the box as well. So I, for one, would legalize adult use marijuana. It's legal in all the states that surround us and in Canada, and then I would tax it. I don't know how much it'll produce, but it'll produce something, and we'll add that to the education funding pool. Everyone knows who attended one of those 70 forums that John Tobin and I taught, that the lottery only pays for 2.5% of public education. It's about $80 million. So we shouldn't be fooled that those kinds of tricks will pay for public education. But look, everyone needs to pay their fair share. People who have second homes on the lakes need to pay their fair share. When we did the school forum in Newport, someone said if the glacier had turned left instead of right, Newport would have the lake and Sunapee would have the school funding forum. It's that arbitrary. And so we need to do a lot better on that front. I would consider income tax. I would consider statewide property tax. I would consider some of the consumption taxes. Nothing's off the table.
Senator?
Okay.
Thank you very much. You know, I respect people with different views on this. I respectfully disagree. I don't support a broad-based income tax. By our Constitution and by Supreme Court order, we cannot have a progressive income tax like the federal. It's a flat. That's all that could potentially be done. And you know who ends up paying that? Teachers, workers, carpenters, plumbers, nurses, and the folks at the top are going to continue to get by. You know, they'll hire the lawyers and the consultants and the accountants. It is a rigged system right now. Our tax code is basically like Swiss cheese, and those at the top benefit from it. So closing loopholes for big corporations and those at the top to fund education and healthcare and fund some of the things that reduce the pressure on property taxpayers. That's what this campaign, that's what we're talking about in this campaign. By the way, that's what we did in the last budget. We secured $140 million in new education funding for our communities. And by the way, we did that by closing loopholes for big corporations in the system, including Netflix and Amazon, who previously were paying nothing. They should pay. Big corporations and people at the top should pay their fair share while everyone else is taking it on the chin. So part of this too is real reform in the system, banning corporate contributions. We're the only candidate that signed the People's Pledge, which forsakes dark money spending in this campaign, releases our tax returns, no self-funding in this campaign, in my campaign, and making sure that we move forward in a way that's transparent. Only candidates release our tax returns. This is critical. Reform matters in this whole debate and discussion. And when Bill O'Brien came in, I don't want to give everybody a headache, but when Bill O'Brien came in and decimated our state budget, so much so that the first budget by Maggie Hassan had less dollars in it unadjusted for inflation than Craig Benson's budget 8 years prior. He didn't do it by getting rid of a broad-based income tax. He did it by exposing loopholes largely benefiting those at the top and big corporations. We need to close those loopholes, look out for everyday granite staters, not impose, in my view, a broad-based income tax on workers like teachers and nurses and firefighters and plumbers and carpenters. We got to get out of this mess in a way that looks out for them, for working people and working families, not impose a broad-based income tax on them.
Okay, thank you. This concludes our Q&A section of this forum. And thank you very much, Steve Taylor, for asking those questions. And what we're going to do now is transition into your closing statements, starting with Senator Feltis. Okay.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. I appreciate it. Judith, Steve, Counselor, thank you all for joining who are tuned in. I appreciate it. It is an honor to be here with you tonight. There's so much at stake in this election. In fact, this is a redistricting year. The implications for this race are not just for the next 2, they're for the next 10. And each and every election, I think we all say, well, this is the most important election of my lifetime. You know what? This election, it's actually true. We got to win in 2020, up and down the ticket. It's critical that we do so. And we're building the campaign and the operation to be successful. With the help and support of so many around the state, we set a record in fundraising this June without corporate money, without corporate PAC money. We are working together to build an operation. We are endorsed by Steve Marchand, Molly Kelly, Colin Van Ostern, and Citizens United, the Voter Protection Project, Let America Vote, 13 labor unions in county. We continue to build out the support, and I respectfully ask for your support in this race. We've got to win it. We'd love to have you on board. And more important than that, I ask for your ongoing activism. So many of folks on the Zoom call have been so active and engaged in making a difference. Everything we say and do makes a difference. I'm reminded on the quote on activism from Bobby Kennedy and then apartheid South Africa, which is apropos for any time, especially this time, that each time someone stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And through many acts of kindness and activism, those ripples, they turn into waves, and those waves can shake down the greatest walls of intolerance and injustice that still exist. Folks, that quote on activism, it was true then, it's true now. It's even more true now. Democracy doesn't go away in a pandemic. We all need to ramp up our game. And I am confident that the work of Sullivan County Democrats, working together, we're going to create those ripples. And those ripples will create waves. And those waves will shake out the forces of obstruction. And we will not just win in this race. We will finally move New Hampshire forward for everybody. So thank you so much. Keep fighting. Keep up the great work. We'll see you out there.
Thank you. And now, Counselor Volinsky.
Thank you, Judith and Steve. Thanks, Dan. Thanks to all the Sullivan County Democrats. Look, we're all Democrats. What unites us is broader than what divides us. But what separates us is important, particularly in a race against Chris Sununu. Chris Sununu has held open the New Hampshire Supreme Court seat for Gordon MacDonald. He wants to put an anti-choice, anti-reproductive rights Chief Justice in place, and we now only have 4 justices sitting. If Chris Sununu is reelected, if we don't work hard enough to prevent that from happening, Chris Sununu will renominate Gordon MacDonald. That's a big issue for us. How do you beat Chris Sununu? You call him out on the property tax. The property tax has gone up during Chris Sununu's administration more than at any other time in our state's history, $320 million. It goes up $300,000 a day because Chris Sununu is an expert at shifting state responsibilities down to local communities and grabbing local money and taking it for the state. He's mastered that, and we need to make the clearest contrast against him on that point. And that's where my Claremont experience is so important, because I understand how important that right to a constitutional state-funded public education is, not only for the children who will benefit from it, but for the taxpayers who pay for it. We need to make the clearest contrast we can. Chris Sununu has not met a pipeline project that he didn't love. He supports the Granite Bridge. He supported Northern Pass. I opposed both, and I have never taken fossil fuel money from Liberty Utilities or from Eversource. That's a difference, and it makes a difference. In terms of how we pay for our campaigns, I'm proud to say that we smashed the record on the number of contributors to our campaign, more than any gubernatorial candidate has ever had in the primary and general combined. We have more contributors now than in the entire cycle. And my campaign has lived its values from day one. We have never had to give back more than, we've never had to give back anything, but we've never given back more than $10,000. That makes it hard to make a contrast with Chris Sununu, who's an expert at exploiting the LLC loophole. You can't challenge Chris Sununu if you did that yourself. My campaign has never done that. As a matter of fact, people know me because I ripped up a $500 check on video. Let me tell you, it's hard for a politician to rip up a $500 check. I did that because it came from a corporate PAC, and it was inappropriate and not in line with my values. That's why Larry Haddock, Granny D's grandson, has endorsed me. That's why Ben and Jerry have endorsed me, and they're naming an ice cream after me. How cool is that? It's called Volinsky's Courageous Crunch, and it's because of my positions on campaign finance. Look, on the environment, we're endorsed by the Sierra Club, the Sunrise Movements, the New Hampshire Youth Climate Strike, the New Hampshire Youth Movement. On social justice, we're endorsed by Rights and Democracy, a really substantial grassroots social justice, racial justice group in New Hampshire. All of those people are coming together to support bold ideas and courageous leadership. Look, Chris Sununu has beaten 2 pledge candidates in a row. There is no reason to believe that a 3rd pledge candidate will do any better. We have had improvements in our budget, but we remain last in the nation. You're not going to fix New Hampshire's school funding, infrastructure, mental health, physical health shortfalls by closing loopholes. We need to put all options on the table. That's why I won't take the pledge. That's why you can trust me to come back to you as a problem solver. Join us. Go to VolinskyNH.com. We can move New Hampshire forward, and I humbly ask for your vote September 8th, and I hope you all vote by absentee because it'll be safer for all of us to do so. So thank you once again. I really appreciate your having us here tonight.
I'd like to thank the audience for participating in this forum on a hot summer's evening to help us with this very important democratic process, which will make our lives better and the lives of our families and everyone we know. In addition, thank you again to the panelists for working with Sullivan County Democrats. And we appreciate Steve Taylor more than we can even say for all the work he's done and what a good job he did this evening. If the audience, which is still on this call, on this Zoom, have any further questions for both candidates, please send them to their campaign contact information, which hopefully was put into the chat, unless the 2 candidates want to do it now. We tried to cover as many policy issues as we could, but it's hard within this restricted time to cover everything, which is why I thought you might want to send a specific question to either of the 2 campaigns.
Judith, do you want to let Dan and me say our websites one more time for everyone?
Yeah, that would be good.
Go ahead, Dan.
Dan Feltus DanFeltesNH.com, DanFeltesNH.com.
Thank you.
VolinskyNH.com, VOLINSK. Oh, it's behind me. VolinskyNH.com. Thanks.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Take
Stay
care,
safe.
everybody.
Stay safe.
Yes, you too. Good night.
Wow.
That's it.